Welcome to the We Are VIP podcast. Each week, your host, Casey Hasten, Director of Recruiting at VIP, will bring you valuable insights from thought leaders, introduce you to incredible companies, and bring you tips for landing your dream job from our team of executive recruiters at VIP. And now, Casey Hasten.
Welcome to the We Are VIP podcast, a podcast devoted to adding value to your career or candidate search, brought to you by VIP. I'm your host, Casey Hasten. I'm an executive recruiter, director of recruiting with VIP, and your all-around hiring guru. And you know it is my absolute delight each week to bring you thought leaders and experts and just people who in general are going to help you collapse that timeline to success. And today is no different. So I'd like to welcome to the show Bravis Brown, managing partner with Global Recruiters of Fort Worth. You know, he spent over 25 years evaluating and, analyzing, planning, and implementing business solutions from startups to mid-sized companies. His passion is striving for excellence through team development of all divisions, constant objective evaluation, and continuous improvement, which we all strive for, right? His goal is to leverage his knowledge and experience to help companies find talent that can add long-term value. And so with that, I'd love to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
It is so exciting. And, I want to point out that even though we are primarily in the same space, almost competitors, I love that we can sit down and have this conversation to benefit those job seekers.
Absolutely.
So I love to talk about, when we talk about job seeking, how important our networks are. So my first question to you is, how did we get connected?
So there was an individual, Eli Delaney,
Yes.
that made a connection for the two of us. I actually utilized him to help me with some marketing material that I could utilize to get my name out and the services that are provided out to the market. Yeah.
He is such a great guy. So how did you meet him?
So through an organization called SCN, or Success Champions Network. And he and I actually now are in the same chapter, MBI. So it's the Metroplex Business Influencers group that we're part of.
Now, is that Danny's?
No, it is Danny. Yes.
He's the founder.
Absolutely. You're 100% correct. And then the chapter president for us is Jeffrey Casanova.
I don't know him.
He's IT. My IT is the company that he works for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I need to meet this gentleman.
Be happy to make the introduction.
See, this is how it works. Yeah. And I love that. And I think it's so important. I was just talking to someone earlier today about, it was a brand new recent grad.
Okay.
And do you work with recent grads, or do you work with the more
Not
executive?
too often. Occasionally on the aviation side, I'll have the mechanics that are coming out. They'll need support, but not too often.
Yeah, and as a recruiter, and I'm sure you know this too, because companies pay us a fee to go find talent, they want experienced talent, right? But every now and then we get one that wants to find a recent grad. But I love when I get to have these conversations with these recent grads before they actually start their career, to help give them that guidance as a mentor, and just to help them along their way.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about you. Let's talk about your journey and how you eventually got into the space of recruiting.
All right. So one of the things that led me here was my most recent business that I had before being here was, at the end of it, a CEO of a holding company. Started out in the VP of operations, and essentially we developed intellectual property around products that we had developed. We had acquired some IP, intellectual property, and then those products that we had developed were essentially enhancements of different active chemistries using an additive that we had purchased. And we used those products to enter into markets from oil and gas to agriculture, life science. But the one thing that I'd like you to take note of is the thing that I thought was in common with recruiting, especially executive level recruiting, is I was in the middle of fundraising, finding a president to build a team around, move into a new segment that maybe I was unfamiliar with. So that person had to be extremely knowledgeable, essentially the specialist in that particular space. And then from that point forward, after we've had the fundraising the individual, it's essentially aligning the operating capital with the human capital. So there was a lot to do with the kind of the timing of. So I spend a lot of my time now focusing on their growth strategy and making sure that the timing of the individuals that we're injecting into the organization are appropriate.
And I think that is so important. I am one of those recruiters, like when I start working with a company, which it sounds like you do the same thing, I want to know everything about that company.
Absolutely.
And here's something that may set me apart from other recruiters, and I'm sure you probably feel the same way. If I won't work for a company, I won't recruit for that company. Because why would I ask somebody else to go work there?
So I believe that to be the difference between what I call collaborative partnerships or relationships as a recruiter versus basically just transactional.
Yes.
And when it becomes, and it's very apparent that it's transactional, I want to transition. So,
Yes. So can you, without naming names, can you give me an example of a company that you've worked with that you would no longer work with?
yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you some comments on the traits that may
Okay.
not be interested in working further. So rapid growth, that's great, but the infrastructure to support that, i.e. communication between the additional businesses that are brought on, causes a breakdown.
Yes.
And the expectations in one particular, let's say, head of a department versus the execution of the hiring manager, those are two entirely different things. So the opportunity for success is minimized.
Yep.
Even if you're introducing who the head of the department wants, the hiring manager may not be aligned. So there was a challenge there that I had, even though I was working with the head of the department, there was a little bit of a strife between those two as to what was the right fit for that particular role. And from there, I was pivoted into another role inside of a different department, same organization, and some of the same challenges. So for that reason, I elected to move away from that particular organization, but I saw that.
You know, may I share a horror story?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I've been doing this for a long time now. It's hard to believe, and it's my second career. But you've had several careers too, right? The transitioning. So, and something I'd like to say about that, it's okay to pivot. It's okay to make a transition to a completely new career. A lot of people, and I feel like it's kind of old school thinking. They think once you go to school for something, you got to do that for the rest of your life. And I think I would have been miserable if I'd have stayed in my original career. So, but going back to my story, so I worked with a client early on when I first started, probably within the first 5 years of recruiting. And I would place people out there and they would quit in like 3 to 6 months. And I was just like, what is going on? And finally, you know, I really figured out where it was. It was coming from the very top. It wasn't coming from the hiring managers. It was coming from the COO.
Okay.
Who was pushing all this culture down. And he was and it was a bigger company. I mean, it wasn't a tiny company, but he had his fingers in every department. And so anyway, I'm really good at finding specialized talent. I actually have an award from one of my clients. It's a purple unicorn.
Okay.
Because I found the purple unicorn for them.
Right.
And so so anyway, with this client, I told him, I was like, I can't do this. You know, number one, I have a guarantee with you guys and I'm placing people and they're falling off and I'm just working and not getting paid, you know? But number two, I'm concerned about the environment that I'm placing these people in. And so I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. Well, they came back to me and they were like, really, we need you. And I'm like, nope, not going to do it. And finally they came back with a fee like that had never been charged before at the company I was with. And I was like, okay, here's the deal. I will recruit for you, but you have to know I'm going to tell them that what a horrible place this is to work from the very beginning, that they probably won't be there more than a year. You're going to pay them well. You're going to pay them above market, but they need to know it's going to really, really stink for a year. And they're like, okay, you know? And so and that's how I recruited for that company. I would tell people when I was recruiting, I was like, they're going to pay you very, very well. You're going to hate your life. You're only going to be there for a year because that's as long as anybody can stay.
Right.
And it worked.
You still had takers.
I did. But I told him, I was like, if you go interview and get this job, you don't blame me because I told you up front what it was like. You chose to take that carrot, that money. So
Right.
I don't know. How do you feel about that I did that?
Well, like I said, you still had people that elected because at the end of the day, it's their choice.
Yep.
And you don't always know their situation. Individuals might want a particular piece or set of experience. For example, in the tax world, they may not have much public accounting experience. This particular example might have given them that.
Yep.
And if they had 1 year in public accounting, that real opportunity that they wanted, now they're qualified for it. So they have to wait a year, but they're getting the experience they want at an above market rate to go into an organization now where they can leverage that salary with the experience they previously didn't have. So it could be a really good situation. It's all situational, and just knowing the background is really important, both of the business and of the candidate. So
The only person that's still there is the COO at this company. That was tough, and that hurt my conscience a little bit. But I felt good knowing that I went in, and my coworkers would send me candidates for the role. But I made it. I told him, I said, I have to pre-screen him. I know you've already pre-screened him, but I have to talk to him. Mm-hmm. And they would listen to me, and I was like, all right, do you want to hate your life? And they're like, would you quit saying that? You know. I'm like, I want them to know what they're getting into. That's just the type of recruiter that I am. So.
Absolutely. I have a role right now where it's at a senior level, it's a C-suite level, but it has a highly different expectation as far as hands-on as that title in other entities. And that's one of the things that you've got to make sure they're aware of.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, you don't want to set them up for failure.
Right.
And again, as a recruiter, and I know a lot of people don't know this, you know, when we place candidates with companies, there's a, you know, probationary time there that if that person quits within that time, then we lose everything. All the work we did is for nothing.
Right. You're doing it again.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Contingency. So
Right.
so when candidates, and I want to talk about this really because I want to talk about the relationship between the candidate and the recruiter, because recruiters get a bad rap.
Absolutely. Didn't realize it before I entered, but yes, there's a stigma.
Yeah, and that's the first thing usually when I engage with candidates that don't know me, that haven't seen my work, or weren't referred to me, which mostly I work off referrals these days, which is nice. But, you know, you've got to undo that bad experience that they had with another recruiter or many other recruiters, because not all recruiters are created equal.
Right. Absolutely.
Because like you said, you got the transactional, but then you've got the ones that are, you know, truly looking out for your best interest. What did you call them? Compassionate?
Collaborative.
Collaborative. I
Yes.
love that word.
Yeah.
You know, another word that I love that one of my clients gave me is calibrate.
Yes.
You have to calibrate with your candidates so that you really understand what they want.
Absolutely. 100%.
And your clients.
Right.
So talk to me a little bit more about how you, your approach to aligning companies with the right talent. What makes your approach unique?
Well, again, to your point, you have to truly understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And a lot of times it makes it very difficult if you can't get engaged in what is their strategy, where are they going, and what are they trying to do. And aligning talent is less about that job description today, more about what that role is going to grow into and where the organization is going to grow. And if those two things aren't aligned, then that's where the challenge in my mind comes for that particular individual, asking questions like, well, where do you see yourself in the next 3 to 5 years? If that answer isn't the same as where the company's trying to go, then there's your first indicator. Yeah, you might get the opportunity to get the commission off of that particular placement, but you know in 2 to 3 years, that individual is going to be unhappy, the business may be unhappy, but it's not a good alignment, in my opinion.
I agree 100%, and that is so very true. And I try, like you, to ask those questions ahead of time to really get to know, like, I mean, and this might be a trick question, but how much time do you spend when you're initially engaging with a new candidate for a job search?
So in the initial screening, or you kind of feel like they could be a good fit, or once you've gotten through maybe, so for clarity, I utilize, sounds like you do, I have other individuals that'll do some of the initial sourcing. And once they've met some of the basic requirements, and then I'll engage. And at that point, I'll typically have some specific things that I maybe see as a hurdle in their resume or an advantage. And I'll dig into those particular things pretty significantly. But that's going to be initially 15 to 20 minutes on that particular candidate. And then that will decide how much time spent in the next steps.
So I love that you have people, and I think we may do it a little bit differently, because typically, like, each recruiter at VIP runs their own desk, right?
Okay.
And so they will bring candidates in, and like, for most clients, if they screen a candidate and they feel like that candidate is worthy of being submitted to my client, which they can do, we can submit to other people's clients, right? Then most of the time I won't have an additional conversation with the candidate unless it's a specific reason, like that one client I was telling you about. Then I will have that conversation. Or if the candidate has more questions than the other recruiter knows about the client, then I'll get on and talk to him about that. But if it's my candidate, I don't have somebody that's going out and identifying candidates for me to screen, like doing little pre-screens. I do pre-screen all the way through to submission. And so I'll spend about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the level of experience, just really digging in. And I'll ask questions that, like, do you have a dog? You know, because not that not having a dog's a bad thing, but that can be, like, some offices allow you to bring your dogs to work.
Right.
That might be important to you.
Right.
So
Aligning culture.
yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
Now, I have to be honest, I've never asked that question.
Really?
Right.
Maybe it's just a girl thing. I don't know.
So there are other questions, though, like that are very important to be able to identify culture. So I'm glad that you do that, because that, again, it's understanding what they're passionate about and then making sure that that passion, you know, relates to the role that they're going to be doing.
Absolutely. Do you use any assessments as a recruiting tool?
So, no, not consistently. From time to time, depending on the role. And I do have an organization right now that does require one, and I utilize one for that particular company. So it kind of depends, to be honest. So not consistently is the best answer.
Okay. I will use one if I hear somebody wavering on what they want to do. You know, like if they're in accounting, but they don't really sound like they love accounting anymore, like somebody else I know. You know, and that's when I'll say, hey, let's pause and let's get some real clarity about what you want to do in your next steps, and I'll have them do this assessment, and then we'll go over that and see. And a lot of times what I'll find is those that are kind of wavering on the accounting aren't really wired to do accounting.
Okay.
And so we start exploring other options if they're open to it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So just really being a career coach, and I think that's the difference. I think I'm more of a career coach than a recruiter.
I could see that.
I just happen to get paid to recruit.
Right.
Works out well.
Right.
So what are some of the trends you're seeing in the industry right now?
Well, you're probably more educated on that than I am, but I'll tell you I'm at probably 30, you're probably at 100,000. But one of the things that I'm seeing right now, when it comes to the individuals that I'm being asked to bring into the organization, there's less and less interest and emphasis on the training. They want them ready to go right now, 100%. And so if it isn't something they're bringing, that skill set or tool set that they're bringing to the table right then, it's becoming harder and harder for me to get them into those roles.
Hence why we don't work with recent grads very often.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that can be a challenge. And, you know, one of the things, like when I engage with candidates, a lot of them will see a job posting, and I try to explain the process to them. And so whenever we have a job that comes in, that goes out internally to our team immediately. So, and it usually takes maybe 36 to 48 hours for it to actually get posted out to our general job posting site. And so I try to explain to people on the front end, I'm like, look, when you see that job posted, I've already had it for 48 hours. So and I'm already looking at all my candidates to say, who might be a fit for this role? If I don't call you, probably means you're not a fit. But if you think I made a mistake, give me a call, we'll go over it. But a lot of times, you know, people see CPA required and they think they don't really mean it. Yeah, they do. You know, they really want that CPA, you know, or they want management experience. Well, I'm ready to move into management. That's not the same.
Right.
So those kind of specific things that we have to deal with.
Absolutely. And, you know, I've heard before I ever got into this industry, a lot of people do not apply because they don't meet every requirement. And then they're encouraged to apply. And I feel a trend is they swung the other way, where I've got these 3 or 4 things out of the 10 things, and that might be what's going to trigger their interest. But it's really not the case from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, it's definitely, you know, especially like maybe if you're applying directly to a company, that would apply a little bit more. But when we post our job descriptions out there, we just put the bare minimum that we need. And so if you see that as a requirement, That's an absolute requirement for us
Right.
at VIP.
Yeah, if I put a CPA, if the word's required, it's on there for a reason.
Yep.
I will not put required unless it's absolutely mandated.
Right, because you don't want to weed people out that might be qualified.
Absolutely. And it's not going to be, not going to be completed by August. It's you have it now.
Exactly.
Because the very first pushback, for those of you that don't know, is, well, there's no certainty that they're going to pass the exam.
Yep.
I'm going to bring them on. They may fail. They're going to want support on the retesting costs and time frame and all these other things.
Yep.
And unfortunately, instead of having that conversation, they just shut it down. I'm not interested. They have to have that certification.
Yep, exactly. And, and to be fair, I work with companies where they have taken that chance and then the person never got their CPA because they didn't pass a section or in a certain amount of time, whatever the rules are. So what advice would you give to job seekers to help them stand out in this competitive market? Because it is truly, the tides have changed, in my opinion, back to, it's not quite the company market yet or the client market yet, but I think we're seeing it shift to that, where it's not so much the job seeker market anymore.
I would agree with that. One of the things right now that I think would be very beneficial, that maybe we didn't take a lot of consideration into, or at least I didn't, I could say something about my age, but a lot of the roles are progressing to where they have more interaction with up and coming technology. And identifying that a lot of people automatically assume if the candidate is younger, they have that exposure. If you're not necessarily younger, go ahead and identify that you have that exposure to the newer technologies. And in addition to that, make sure you're much more aligned with what that job description is that you're applying to, because some people feel like they've got a good resume and they don't want to modify, and they feel like it's very applicable to everything in accounting or everything in operations. And it's a little different because I didn't do belt operations. I did some other type, but it's close enough.
Yeah.
But really, in actuality, it needs to be as close as possible, and that's what I don't see a lot of candidates do. They put a immediate application in through, whether it's LinkedIn or some other, where it's automated, and the resumes are a little off. So this is a funny piece. I'm going to tell you as I watched myself change. When I first moved into recruiting, I would get something like that and I'd have a little sense of, guilt about not taking time to read it. And then my mindset changed. So like, if you're not going to take the time to assess what the job description is and make the effort to align it with what the opportunity is, I'm not going to take the time to go through and pick through to see if you have what's required. So immediately, if it says at the very top of it that I'm looking for, and that's something different than what I've got, right?
How long? Okay, this is a question I love to ask. How much time do you spend on each resume?
I feel like I spend more than most.
Okay.
But the only way that I do that is, and for me, again, back to those requireds. If the requireds are in there, then I'll dig to see if I can make the other things align.
Yes.
So that's what typically happens. If the requireds are there, I'll spend more time. If they're not there, I might look to see if there's something, maybe there isn't requireds is what I mean. Then I'll look for something that maybe is going to be a little more stands out a little bit better. For example, if there's an organization that's looking for a senior manager and since we're both done some tax and accounting, but there's really no requirements about M&A, but I know that the company's going through current merger and acquisitions, then I'm going to go through and say, hey, have they ever been in an organization that's done a transition, or have they been responsible for the integration of another ERP system? And that's where I'll end up spending some time to see if they've actually been able to go through that merger process. So I'll spend time there, but otherwise, typically not too much.
Yeah, I can typically, because, we get a lot of unsolicited resumes sent to us and for many different reasons, but, I can, and I do look at all of them, but I will tell you, I probably spend, on the ones that aren't qualified, I can probably tell in about 7 to 10 seconds.
Yeah, I'm not that fast.
I've been doing it a while.
I've got it to where I'm probably in that 30 seconds.
That's pretty good.
I'll jump into the first paragraph. I'll go down and look for some essential certifications. And if those two things aren't really aligned, then I'm typically finished.
Do you know what I look at first?
What was it? What is that?
Degrees and timelines.
Okay. Yep. The length of time that they've been at the role.
Yeah, because if you're moving jobs every 6 months, I'm not going to be able to help you.
Yeah.
And if your degree is not relatable or the required degree that I need for that role?
Here's the tip.
Okay.
Since you mentioned that, it triggered this thought. If you're doing contract work, and that's why you have multiple different roles, identify it as contract work.
Yes.
And if there's a primary contract company that you were doing it for, identify that company above all the contract work.
Yep. That's really good advice, because that's the first question. And a lot of times, because we do get so many resumes, we're not going to take time to call you and ask you why you left each job. And it may be layoffs, it may be restructures, it may be very viable reasons, but I'm not going to take the time to call, probably. Right. I would even go so far as to say, and I think this is really helpful, if you are moving jobs more than typical, go ahead and put your reason for leaving on your resume.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Just get those questions out of the way.
Yep. With that said, other tips that you would give us on things that you could do when it comes to scanning resumes as a recruiter, what are some other ways that I could accelerate my scanning and assessment process? I
think the degree and the timelines are probably the fastest way to speed that up.
Okay.
If you use those as criteria. And then just looking at the job progression next, like if you have somebody that goes from senior accountant to controller to accountant, it's probably not necessarily worth your time. I'm not gonna say it's not worth your time. For me, I'm not gonna probably go ask the question why.
So I've got some more questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
Not trying to be the host. So one of the things that I've looked at and sometimes struggle early on, especially, and still today to some degree, and I'll use myself as an example, small startup company. I jumped in and had an accounting and finance background, operational background, finance and accounting educational background, and an operations hands-on experience type background. I came in as a cost accountant, promoted pretty quick into that organization. Next thing you know, I'm the controller, right? Of a
startup.
Of a $4 million, company. Yeah. So what I found is those titles can vary significantly as far as overall responsibility. The functions might be the same, but the overall responsibility, the size of the departments, et cetera,
very different.
Can be very different. So when I'm talking to an individual and they've got that title, I'm trying to identify specifically the size of the organization, yes, because that tells me a lot as to where I can go look. And then they're wondering, and this is kind of the tip, well, I've applied to 15 different companies that are mid-sized companies for controller roles that they have open. You're not really a controller in their eyes.
Yep.
You're more of a staff accountant.
Yep. And here's a tip on the resume that you can do that will help your recruiter help you before you even start that conversation. If it's a small company, put the revenue, approximate revenue, yes, whether it's public or private. Those things, because being a controller in a publicly traded company that's, $4 billion in revenue is way different than being a controller in a $100 million company.
Absolutely.
And if you put that, and like maybe you went from a controller in a $100 million company to an accounting manager in that $4 billion public company, that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So the more information you include about that, the more you're going to help your recruiter determine whether or not they want to call you.
And spend time on your resume. Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. Great tip.
I know. We could talk resumes all day. I will give one more tip. I'm not sure if you know this one. But if you are a job seeker and you are applying for jobs, yes, you need to tailor your job to that job description and to that role that you're applying for. You don't want to have, I'm looking for a financial analyst role and you're applying to a staff accountant role, right? That's a big turnoff, big no-no. Right. But there is a job site out there that's, have you heard of jobscan.com? Mm-hmm. Do you recommend it?
I do recommend it.
It's great because it allows you to have, upload the description, the job description, upload your resume, and it gives you a percentage match.
Yep, absolutely.
So great way to break through the ATS system.
Yes.
So you're not going to believe this.
Okay.
We're almost out of time.
I don't believe you.
I told you. It goes by quick, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
So I am going to ask you one of our VIP questions.
All right.
And I think what I want to ask you, just to kind of get in the head of a recruiter.
Uh-oh.
I know, because we're kind of odd ducks. If you were chosen to be one of the first colonists on Mars, what 3 things or people would you take with you?
All right. So first, you have to know I'm extremely literal at times.
Okay.
Right. So procreation is a requirement.
Okay.
My wife has to go.
Your wife has, not because you love her.
No. So I'm not going to touch that. Absolutely, I do. And then I look at communication and outreach and how do I potentially continue to develop the opportunity to connect with others outside of Mars. So I'm looking at either communication systems or satellite type systems that I might want to take with me. And then after that, I'm looking at survivalist type things. So nutrition would be one, or medical might be the other. The two of those somehow combined would be great, but that doesn't exist. So I know you told me three. So those would probably be, the third one would probably be some type of nutritional package, a kit that I could use to kind of start. And then the other one that jumped in my mind just now was power generation, whether that be some type of solar panel system for renewable energy.
Now you're going to have to ditch your wife. That's for.
So yeah, I'm going to have to figure out how to do a combo unit, but nonetheless, a satellite with a panel of some sort. But anyway, yeah, I think probably it's a really good question. There's a lot of things to consider, but
And it's so broad intentionally
to
make you think and let us see how you think a little bit. So how do people get in touch with you?
Well, obviously, I'm all over LinkedIn like most recruiters. I try not to be the creepy recruiter, you know. In fact, if I'm reaching out to you and promising you that I have the right candidate for you, just delete it. I delete it too. There's no such thing. It's very difficult for people to reach out that way and really be sincere about it. It rarely happens.
Yeah.
And if I am, it's because I know you really well, and you're not going to be getting it from me on LinkedIn. You're going to be getting it from a phone call. So if you are one of those candidates listening to this or one of those clients listening to this, and it's a recruiter you don't know and they've got the perfect fit, just delete it.
Thanks. That was my tactic. No, I'm kidding.
So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can also reach out to me through my website, and I can give you those links that maybe we can put at the bottom.
Yeah, we'll put them in the show notes for sure.
Perfect.
All right. Well, I just have one last thing to say to you. You are a VIP.
And that's a wrap for today. Join us next week here on the We Are VIP podcast. We'd love to know how we can help you be a VIP. To find out more, log on to wearevip.com.